Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. Many First Nations in Quebec have been hosting protests to denounce Bill 97, which aims to modernize the province's forestry regime. But many First Nations are against this legislation. Some communities have set up blockades on roads that logging trucks use and sent eviction notices to logging companies. In Montreal, multiple protests have been held to denounce the bill. Inuk activist Emily Fleming-Dubuc has organized 3 protests, with a 4th one set to be hosted in Quebec's capital later this month. It's a response to Quebec's forestry minister inviting First Nations to co-write the bill with her ministry. Fleming-Dubuc says First Nations shouldn't just be invited to co-write, but should instead be the ones writing these bills.
On organise une manifestation le 19 juillet. Ça va être au Parlement. Nous allons communiquer les infos sur nos plateformes, tout simplement parce que il y a plusieurs personnes qui veulent se joindre à nos mobilisations, mais on se rend compte que c'est non seulement à Montréal, mais plusieurs nous ont demandé de se rassembler à Québec. On a plusieurs organismes aussi qui veulent se joindre à la cause et nous offrir leur aide, parce que ce projet de loi, c'est un projet de loi qui va toucher l'ensemble des Québécois et Québécoises. C'est pas seulement les Premières Nations, les Autochtones, mais c'est un projet de loi qui touche l'ensemble des Québécois et Québécoises.
A caribou in the Nunavut community of Coral Harbour tested positive for rabies in early April. At the time, Nunavut's Department of Health said it is rare for caribou to get rabies. A further outbreak has not been reported since. With Coral Harbour neighboring Nunavik in northern Quebec, APTN News spoke with Marianne Gagne. Gagne is a biologist and provincial coordinator for rabies for Quebec's Ministry of Environment, Climate Change, Wildlife and Parks. She spoke about concerns of rabies spreading to wildlife in Nunavik. She says Nunavik is already dealing with foxes being infected with rabies. Gagne says there is an endemic of rabies in foxes in the northern region, which can be transmitted to other animals, even humans. She says the best course of action to address rabies is prevention.
Because usually, like foxes, they don't come close to community when there's dogs outside and all that. If they're vaccinated, they're going to protect the community as well as protect the families and all that, because they won't be able to transmit the virus, because dog can contract rabies from an infected fox and after could be transmitting it to human as well. So vaccinating dogs and staying away from wildlife, and if you have to manipulate because you're hunting or you're trapping, just make sure you wear gloves. And if there's any chances of, splattering some liquid like fluid in your face, you can even wear glasses or wear a mask. So those are all ways to protect yourself against rabies.
It's been just over a year since Victoria Gold's Eagle Mine disaster near Mayo, Yukon, which resulted in hundreds of millions of liters of cyanide solution to be released into the surrounding environment. Now, a new report is shining a light on the causes behind the incident. As Sarah Connors tells us, the chief of the First Nation at the heart of the incident feels there's still more questions than answers.
According to an independent review board tasked with looking into the incident, multiple factors led to last year's Eagle Gold Mine disaster. In a report released Wednesday, the board found an area of the mine's heap leach facility had too steep of a slope and a history of poor drainage. That, in combination with what the report calls adverse conditions and events, such as inadequate management of the mine's ore quality, triggered the failure. The review board also found Victoria Gold and its third-party contractors had a hand in the incident through their actions or inactions.
We can't trust the land anymore like we've been taught to.
At the heart of the disaster is the First Nation of Notchonoyakdun, whose traditional territory the mine is on. Chief Donna Hope isn't surprised by the report's findings.
The heap was compromised by recklessness and lack safety culture at all stages, and that's how the catastrophic landslide was the result.
She also feels the report only scratches the surface of the failure and that the territorial government needs to hold a public inquiry to better understand what went wrong.
We need accountability. We need to know the role Yukon government in permitting or failing to prevent increasingly dangerous conditions at mine sites like that.
The report provides recommendations to prevent future incidents, such as changes to industry practices in the regulatory process. Mines Minister John Stryker says the government is reviewing the report's findings and will determine the appropriate next steps for a public inquiry. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
Thanks, Sarah. The mine was placed into a court-ordered receivership last year and is now up for sale. Coming up after the break, our Truth and Politics panel will be here to discuss the calls for the resignation of Manitoba's accessibility minister. But first, our Yellowknife video journalist Bruce Dela Cruz is back from holidays and gives us the latest on what he's working on this week.
Hi there. Youth aged 11 to 16 from the Northwest Territories went on a week-long canoe trip on the Decho River, organized by Northern Youth Leadership, a nonprofit based in Yellowknife. Partnering with institutions such as NASA, the youth learned environmental practices, culture, and leadership in fun, hands-on activities. Stay tuned for that story.
Welcome back. A college graduate is speaking out after the American Sign Language interpreter she relied on was asked to leave the stage at an event held by the Manitoba government last week. She says the Minister for Accessibility is not meeting expectations when it comes to deaf and hard of hearing Manitobans. Here's Sav Jonesa with her story.
30 years after graduating high school and proudly raising 6 children, Deborah Ovshar now has a college certificate in child and youth care. She found a trauma-informed program that instilled pride in her as an Indigenous woman who grew up in foster care. It was also accessible as a deaf person who speaks American Sign Language, or ASL.
So many people who are not deaf or hard of hearing, they don't understand what we're going through. They don't understand our day-to-day life.
Supported by her daughter Stephanie, who is also deaf, Ovshar recently celebrated her hard work at a graduation ceremony for Indigenous women. It was put on by the Manitoba government and hosted by the province's Minister for Gender Equality, Nahanni Fontaine.
At first it was beautiful. It was a lovely event. We arrived. It was colorful. It felt joyful.
But things turned sour only seconds after Fontaine's speech finished. They say Fontaine, who is also the Minister for Accessibility, told the ASL English interpreter they relied on to leave the stage.
It felt completely in contradiction to what she had just said, right? We were inspired, we were watching, she had this beautiful speech, and then you could tell when she walked and was talking to the interpreter, we didn't know what she was saying, but the vibe clearly changed, right? And then the interpreter moved and was like, oh, okay. So this is an event to celebrate the people who can hear, not us, right? Where are they?
Immediately after, in front of reporters and cameras, Fontaine told her press secretary about her frustrations with the interpreter.
It was okay. I was thrown off. It wasn't great. But because the woman, she shouldn't have been on the stage. I couldn't see anybody on the side. And all I could see her was her... Yeah. So I'm like, why did they on the stage? So I'm like, you need to react.
Ovshar tells APTN National News that when she first saw the video, her heart sank.
I opened it and I saw, and my jaw just dropped. The emotions just came from everywhere. I was angry, pissed off, and at the same time I was trying to remain calm and control myself and think my way through that. I didn't know what to do.
Ovshar says those comments hurt even more because she had to organize for an interpreter to even be present at the event after repeatedly asking the government to hire one weeks before and receiving no response. Red River College ended up providing the interpreter's service so ASL speakers could be fully included in the celebration.
Indigenous people, we face racism, discrimination, barriers every day. Deaf people experience autism and discrimination every day. Being both, you have more discrimination, and as a woman as well. And so there's just this intersectionality and these layers of these various experiences.
Amidst backlash, Fontaine issued public and private apologies to those affected. Ovshar says the emailed apology from Fontaine's office fell short and hopes Fontaine apologizes in person with an ASL interpreter present.
So that's not what I'm looking to do. What I want is learning. A mistake has been made, but can you really make the effort to learn from this? To learn about who we are, to learn from our community, from us as people and as Manitobans.
She believes a minister for accessibility should have a lived experience with a disability to understand how accessibility barriers may affect others. Going forward, Ovshar hopes the Manitoba government invests in hiring an on-staff ASL interpreter so deaf and hard of hearing Manitobans are no longer an afterthought. Sav Jonesa, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Well, there has been a lot of reaction over the past week to the comments made by Manitoba's Minister of Accessibility about an American Sign Language interpreter. First reported by APTN News, Nahanni Fontaine was caught on camera saying the interpreter was distracting and should not have been on stage. And as you just heard, one of the deaf graduates in the audience at the event says Fontaine had the interpreter removed from the stage. For more on the fallout, our Truth in Politics panel is here. Jennifer Lewitz is the CEO of Pusquash Strategies, and Nigan Sinclair is a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press. Jennifer, Nigan, great to see you both. Nigan, let's start with you and your thoughts on what Accessibility Minister Nahanni Fontaine had to say about the ASL interpreter when she was unaware she was on camera.
Well, it's a good lesson that the mics are always hot, and if you don't want things to be said in public, you shouldn't say them in front of cameras. Whether you're unaware or not, you should know better than this. This was also a big mistake, and I think she's acknowledged that. She's apologized. I'm not sure what this pound of flesh that people want. If she's going to resign, then the reality is that if you are a politician and you say atrociously offensive things, you could be U.S. president, but I guess you can't be Minister of Accessibility. Nahanni Fontaine, I marched with her. I've worked with her for years. She's a person who, yes, a complicated person. Yes, a person that sometimes makes mistakes. I mean, who doesn't? I certainly have over the years. And but is a person who has owned it and has done much good work over the years. And I know for sure that she is someone who is a very strong advocate for people who need accessibility needs. I think, if anything, she should work on building relationships with communities and leave it at that.
Jennifer, there has been a lot of reaction to this. Many are defending the minister for making a mistake, and she has issued 2 apologies now. What's your take on it?
Well, it's kind of tough because I am, an Indigenous person that lives with a permanent disability. So I have a lot of personal feelings in the matter on how people view people with disabilities, and especially Indigenous people with disabilities. And that's why we have organizations like BCANs that are out there to make sure that we're represented. I think when it comes to this specific minister, I think she's great. I'm actually a big fan of her, and I don't want to see her out of cabinet. And I also am really hesitant to say that she should resign from her position as minister. I think we need to leave it up to these disability organizations to meet with her and then to make that decision on what they see is the right outcome from this. It is ministers that are responsible for files like that essentially have mandates to break down barriers, and also so that people understand what those barriers are. So when we're hearing people say these things behind closed doors, it kind of also tells us that there may not be an understanding of how important it is to bring accessibility into every space that we're in. So whether or not she should remain as the minister of that department is obviously up for the debate. But I don't think that we should make this super political either. I think that moments like this can be used as teaching moments on why we have these ministries, why we have accessibility resources in these spaces, and what we can all learn from this.
Well, to the surprise of nobody, I think, Nigan, the progressive conservatives here in Manitoba have called for her resignation. Your podcast colleague, Dan Lett, has written an editorial out on this, pondering whether Premier Wab Kinew should fire Minister Fontaine over this. I take it from what you said earlier, though, that you don't think it needs to go that far.
Well, no surprise. I mean, the opposition's got to talk about, pulling down the government or pulling down elements of the government. There's a very popular provincial government in Manitoba. Wab Kinew's popularity ratings are very high. The Conservatives cannot reach those heights other than to try to attack him at any angle that they can get. And this is certainly an angle that they can attack. Nahanni Fontaine has been affiliated with Wab Kinew, thinking all the way back to his moments within his leadership run, in which he was accused of different things. It was Nahanni Fontaine who was there during every press conference, standing beside, supporting Wab Kinew. In many ways, Nahanni Fontaine's career is really wrapped up in Wab Kinew's success too. So I'm not surprised at all that the opposition would be going after that. I'm not surprised that pundits like my colleague Dan Lett would ponder openly, because it's worth talking about. It's worth talking, as Janet pointed out, that it's worth the potential discussion of whether the Minister of Accessibility portfolio is appropriate for someone who perhaps said these offensive things. That doesn't mean that she should leave cabinet, doesn't mean certainly that she should leave the NDP caucus. What it means is that perhaps stepping aside, or maybe being overwhelmed, or being somebody who needs to step aside and learn a little bit. And I mean, we all need to do those things. This is nothing to be shameful of. And I don't think that having a public trial or having, calling someone out publicly and questioning their entire career over one mistake is a worthwhile endeavor. It's certainly not productive, and it's certainly not Indigenous to do that.
As Dan points out, the House is obviously on summer break here, or the legislature, so we're not hearing about it there. Do you think, though, Minister Fontaine also has the gender equality and families, those are some big portfolios to have here in the province. Jennifer, do you think there needs to be a new Minister of Accessibility in Manitoba?
When this first happened, I was calling for her resignation because I was upset. I think I actually just said she needs to be removed from that position. And I think it's because the PWD, which is the People with Disabilities community, is so tight knit, especially on, X and TikTok and LinkedIn. It's almost like my same people that I go to see what their takes are also on this. But disabilities are also very diverse. And I think that is why people that are placed in these positions, especially to be ministers responsible for these portfolios, have to have such a good understanding of what disabilities are and what they look like, and how the accessibility piece is huge. Because really, it's not about giving people those extra resources or making people uncomfortable on stage because the interpreter is there. I think people need to recognize that people with disabilities have significant barriers in a lot of areas of our lives. For me, I'm visually impaired, and I also live with a permanent neuro disease. So some of my disabilities sometimes aren't always seen, but some of the resources or accessibility measures that I need are life-changing for me, and they can make or break my situation in a room. And I just think about how somebody there might have been hard of hearing, and that would have been their resource to enjoy that event. So I just think there's a lot of learning that can happen here. And I think that maybe this is a little bit of a hot take. I think this is why everybody needs to have some level of training, or even awareness training on what disabilities looks like, especially while we're going to be passing disability legislation and disability acts and making our society more inclusive and accessible. Then we need to make sure that we're watching what we say, because it's behind closed doors what's being said that concerns me about the knowledge around disabilities.
We're going to continue the conversation over on the Truth in Politics podcast, but we'll leave it there for now. Thanks to you both.
Thanks.
And of course, we're always looking for your feedback on this or anything else you see here, or your story ideas. Here's how you can continue the conversation with us. If you have a story you want to share, you can send us an email to news@aptn.ca. You can read and watch our stories by going to our website, aptnnews.ca. You can also find us online on your favorite social media sites, including TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, and X. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. Time for one last break, but stick around, there's more to come. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Coming from Atlan, British Columbia, Brandon Patrick Williams sent in a stunning photo of the shoreline on a beautiful clear day. Thanks, Brandon. For the chance to be featured as our next photo of the day, you can send your photos to share@aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, 24 in Halifax, showers, and 25 for Fredericton. Cloudy and 21 in Kuujjuaq, 16 in Nain. Rain and 26 in Montreal, showers and 22 in Val-d'Or. 23 with rain in Sault Ste. Marie, rain and 28 in Ottawa. 25 in Thunder Bay, showers and 23 in Sioux Lookout. Rain and 22 in Thompson, God's Lake and Norway House. Sunny and 27 for Winnipeg, Brandon and Dauphin. 26 under sunny skies in Regina, Saskatoon and North Battleford. 22 in Uranium City, 25 in Meadow Lake. Cloudy across northern Alberta, 24 in High Level, Fort Chip and Fort McMurray. Cloudy and 26 in Edmonton and Calgary. Sunny and 25 in Vancouver, 34 under sunny skies in Kamloops. 25 in Prince George, cloudy and 24 in Smithers. 16 in Old Crow, cloudy and 20 in Whitehorse. 22 in Yellowknife, 23 in Wrigley. 9 in Sax Harbor, 14 in Pawlatuck. Cloudy and 16 in Chesterfield, 19 and cloudy in Arviat. 3 in Resolute, rain and 7 in Igloolik. Sticking with the weather now, storm chasers in Alberta spotted a tornado west of Edmonton yesterday. Environment Canada says the tornado touched down around 5 p.m. and stayed on the ground for about 15 minutes. Tornado and several other severe weather warnings were issued in the region last night. The Northern Tornado Project plans to visit the area today to assess possible damage. Been a wild one out there for the weather. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Thursday. For more, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca, or our APTN News YouTube page. And Creason will be here at 1 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow for your first look at Friday's news. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy McGuitch, thanks for being with us. Stick around, an encore presentation of Face to Face is up next. Have a great night.